Alright, what's going on everyone? Welcome to my Vue 3 crash course. We're going to be covering the fundamentals of Vue 3 by building a CRUD to-do tracking application. Through this course, you'll learn about setting up a Vue application using the official Vue build tool, the structure of a Vue application and how Vue works, core Vue fundamentals such as reactive data, special Vue directives, reusable components, Vue routing basics, and more by building a full CRUD to-do application using Vue 3's composition API. And then we'll be deploying this Vue application to Netlify. Whether you're brand new to Vue or just looking for a refresher, by the end of this course you should be in a great place to start building your own Vue applications. While we will cover a lot about Vue in this crash course, I won't be able to cover everything. If you're looking to continue learning more about Vue and build some awesome projects, I'm currently working on a new Vue course. At the time of recording this crash course, it isn't out yet, but you can head over to my website and join the waiting list. It should be releasing around summer of 2023. If you do sign up, I'll send you over a 50% discount code you can use when it releases. Also, if you'd like to support me, this Vue crash course is going to be available on Udemy. The content on Udemy is mainly the same as a crash course here on YouTube, but it comes with a few extra perks. It's going to be ad-free, it'll have quizzes and coding exercises throughout the course after lessons, and also a few extra lectures. That link will be down below in the description as well. Before we get started, I want to cover a few prerequisites. First, you should have a solid understanding of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript before diving into any front-end framework. If you don't, I'd highly suggest coming back to this video at a later time once you have those fundamentals down. For this crash course, we're going to be using Node to scaffold out a new Vue project using the official Vue build tool. So you're going to want to make sure you have that installed. If you don't, pause the video here and head over to Node.js and install that. Lastly, you're going to need a text editor, and for this course I'm going to be using VS Code. Within VS Code, I'm going to be using some really handy extensions for Vue, which I suggest you install as well. And those extensions are Volar and Vue VS Code snippets. Alright, before we dive into working with Vue, I want to spend some time covering what Vue is and how it works. Vue.js is one of the three popular front-end JavaScript frameworks used to create dynamic and data-driven single-page applications that are client-side rendered. You also have other popular front-end frameworks such as React and Angular. For the most part, these frameworks all do the same thing, but each one has a slightly different way of doing it. As I mentioned, Vue is a SPA, which is short for a single-page application. How a single-page application works is instead of requesting each page from the server, as you'd see in a website without the use of a framework, SPAs handle everything on the client side. The initial request to the website will reach out to the server and obtain and then send back the HTML for the website. With this request, we also get back the Vue JavaScript bundle, which then takes full control over the website in the browser. Each time we request a new page, the website will use the Vue JavaScript bundle to produce that requested page instead of reaching out to the server, and this is known as client-side rendering. Now, you might be wondering, well, how does Vue know which page to display? Well, Vue has an official library called the Vue Router, and we'll be covering this more within the course, but this is how all pages are going to be handled inside of a single page application using Vue. Simply what you do is configure each route or path to link to a component. If the requested path a user requests matches a route inside of your router configuration, it'll then request and load in that component. Now, a few downfalls to a single page application is that it has a higher first load performance, which can negatively impact your search engine optimization. However, after the initial load, it can heavily improve the user experience with a fast performant website or application. Since Vue is a single page application, what happens is the crawlers are going to have a hard time crawling and indexing your website, which is where something like Nux, a server-side rendered framework for Vue, can be utilized. Now, in order for you to use Nux, you should really have a good understanding of how Vue works, since Nux is actually built on top of Vue. And I'll also be creating an updated crash course on Nux 3 here very soon. Now, although Vue is a front-end framework, it's very common to actually pair Vue or a front-end framework with back-end technologies like Node and Express, or even something like Firebase or Supabase to create powerful full-stack applications. So you might be wondering, why would you choose Vue over a traditional vanilla JavaScript application? And there is a handful of reasons, such as the ability to create dynamic data-driven interactive apps and websites. Now, Vue also has something called the virtual DOM, and essentially the virtual DOM is a virtual lightweight copy of the actual DOM. And when the virtual DOM gets updated in Vue, it will then compare the two, the virtual DOM and the actual DOM, and only update what has changed instead of the actual entire DOM, which is going to make updates to the DOM quicker and more efficient. Vue also has special directives that simplify a lot of common things that we would do inside a vanilla JavaScript application. When using Vue, we also have the ability to create components which allow us to create reusable logic, and also Vue is extremely lightweight. So as I mentioned earlier, Vue is not the only front-end JavaScript framework. There's also React and Angular, which are two other popular choices. And you may be wondering, well, why would I choose Vue over these two other frameworks? And generally, these frameworks, as I mentioned, are all going to basically do the same thing, but each one has a different way of doing it. However, I feel that Vue actually offers the easiest learning curve compared to the other two frameworks. And the reason being is Vue is very similar to traditional HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And to use it, you really only need fundamental knowledge of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, making it easier to understand and comprehend, especially if this is your first front-end framework. Vue is also constantly growing. Vue 3 was actually just released not too long ago, which brought a lot of great changes to the framework. It also has a great community with many developers sharing their knowledge. And there's also a lot of resources and libraries that are easily integratable. And Vue also has a handful of official libraries such as the Vue router for client-side routing and Pinia for state management, which can be added incrementally to your applications as needed. The last thing I want to cover for this introduction to Vue is what a single file component is. Now, Vue files operate on a single file component, and again, this is where I feel the learning curve is minimal. A single file component is going to encapsulate the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript all into one single file. For example, here is what a common single file component might look like for a navigation component. At the top, you're going to have your script, which is where you're going to write all the JavaScript for a specific component. Within here, you could create data, which can be outputted to the template, or even create functions to do something such as open and close a mobile navigation menu. Then you have your template, which is going to be for the HTML. And lastly, you can add style tags to style up the component itself. And that is what a single file component is. And this is how we're going to be creating components throughout this crash course. Alright, so over on GitHub, I've went ahead and created a repository for this crash course. I've made a branch for each section as well as a branch for the starting files and completed project. So if you're having issues following along and want to check out the code for that particular section, you'll be able to reference that here. And each section in this video should correlate with the branch within this dropdown. With the basics out of the way, let's begin to generate our Vue project via the Vue build tool. To do this, I'll start by creating a new folder on my desktop and call this Vue Todos. I'm going to open up this folder with VS Code. Now, VS Code has an integrated terminal, and to open this, you can either navigate to the top and select Terminal and then New Terminal, or you're able to use the keybind control backtick. Within the terminal, we're going to want to run the command npm init vue@latest to generate a new Vue project. Remember, for this to work, you'll need to ensure you have Node installed on your system. Considering this would be your first time using the tool, it'll ask you to proceed by selecting the Y key. It'll then ask for the name, which I'll call this Vue Todos. Next, we have the option to configure Vue for TypeScript, which for this crash course we won't be doing. However, if you are interested in learning about Vue for TypeScript, I will be creating a mini crash course on this very soon. We won't need JSX support, so I'll select No. Next, we have the ability to add the Vue router, which, as I mentioned earlier, is how Vue handles pages. We're going to be using this very minimally, so we'll want to select Yes. Then we have another Vue library for state management called Pinia. This library is beyond this course, but if you are interested in learning more about this, I do have an introduction video already on my channel that you can watch, and I'll leave a link down below in the description. For unit testing, end-to-end testing, and also ESLint, I'm just going to be selecting No. With this completed, we now have the Vue Todos folder created. The last thing we'll want to do is install all of the dependencies. To do this, we're going to want to cd into the Vue Todos folder and run the command npm install. Once that finishes, we'll now have our Vue project created. Now that we have our Vue project created, let's take a look at how Vue works. First, what we're going to do is start the local development server. The local development server is a way to view all the changes we make locally to the application in the browser in real time. Inside of our packets.json, you'll see we have a few scripts. To spin up the local development server, we just want to run the dev script. So within the integrated terminal, let's run the command npm run dev. Once that's completed, you'll see we have the application running locally. Let's open this up within the browser. Now that we have this up and running, let's take a look at how Vue works under the hood. If we expand the source folder, we can see a file called main.js. This is essentially the entry point for Vue. In this file, the create app function is being imported from Vue, along with a single file component app and then the router. Then there's a variable of app that is being declared, and it's set equal to the create app function, and it's being passed a single file component of app as a parameter. Lastly, on the app variable, we have access to a function called mount, which allows Vue to mount the application to the DOM. And it's being mounted to an element with an ID of app. And this element exists within the index.html file within the root of the Vue files. So what's happening is the app.vue file is the main Vue component that everything gets routed through. This component is being used to create the Vue application, and then it gets mounted or injected into the div with an ID of app. And this index.html file becomes a single page for the entire application. If we take a look at the app.vue file, we can get a better understanding of how Vue works. Within the template, we have a few elements, and those can be seen within the browser here. Now, each element within this template is going to be included on every page that we have in the application. For example, within the header, you'll see this navigation element. Within here, there is router link elements, which is how users are able to navigate to different routes within the Vue application. The router link element accepts a to-prop to inform Vue which route to request. So if we head over to the application and begin to switch pages within the navigation, you'll see that the content within the header tag of the app.vue file remains on both pages. However, the content beneath the header is different for each page, and this is being controlled by this element here, the router view. As the name suggests, this renders in the current view associated with the route the user has requested. If the route, for example, is /about, then the router will see this and request and load in the component that is assigned to this path. It will replace the router view element with all the content associated with that component, which in this default application is just simply this h1 tag. So in this app.vue file, you'll mainly be adding components that you want across every page in your Vue application, such as a navigation or a footer component. Now we're going to take a step back and look at the script portion of a Vue single file component. Every Vue component goes through a series of steps when it's created, and these steps are referred to as lifecycle hooks. Now on the script tag, there is an attribute called setup that you'll be seeing in all the Vue single file components within the starting template. This is a syntactic sugar for using the composition API with Vue single file components. And it's recommended that you use this attribute when using the composition API over just a traditional script tag. Prior to the syntactic sugar, you had to declare what is called a setup function, which is the first lifecycle hook in the Vue component creation process. Now, the setup function is used to write your reactive state and JavaScript functions. And to use these within the template, you had to return the state and functions at the end of the setup function. When using the setup attribute, you no longer need to define this. All the code within the script tag is now going to be compiled as the content of the component setup function. So not only does this allow you to write less boilerplate inside of your components, it also improves your application's performance. So throughout this course, we're going to be using the setup attribute within components. Now, after the setup function is ran in the creation process, there is still a series of additional lifecycle hooks that run. And here's a great diagram from the Vue docs breaking down each step of the process. So for example, each time that we're changing pages within the Vue application, the component that is being rendered to the page is going through this lifecycle process. Through each step of the life cycle, a function is going to run, allowing you the opportunity to add your own code at specific stages. Now, it's not all too important to fully understand what's happening within the life cycle of a component right now, as we're just beginning to learn Vue. But as you continue to explore and build with Vue, this diagram and the Vue docs can be a helpful reference. Now that we understand how Vue works, let's take a look at the structure of this default Vue project. We are going to be removing a majority of this boilerplate template, but the initial template is going to give you a good understanding of the basics of Vue. If we expand the source folder, we'll first see a folder called Assets, and this is where you're going to store all of your assets such as your images, videos, or even global styles, as you can see here initially. Next, we have a Components folder, which will be used to store all of the reusable components. If we open up the first component, hello world.vue, we can see the single file component structure mentioned earlier. At the top, we have the script, then the template, and lastly the style tag. Now within the script, there's something called define props. What props allow you to do is pass data, specifically JavaScript values, from one component to another. In this default application, there is a message prop that is being defined, and it has a type of string and is also required. What this means is that the value of this prop must be a string and should always be passed to this component. Then this prop is being outputted to the template using what is called must-hash syntax. This is how you insert data into the template of a Vue single file component. Inside of the app.vue file where this component is being used, you're able to see this attribute of message defined on the hello world component. This is actually called a prop, and you're able to control the value directly from this component. Currently, as you can see, the prop is a string with the value of you did it. So we can actually update this prop to something else, and as you can see, once we do that, that change will be updated within the application. Again, the main purpose of props is the ability to pass JavaScript data from one component to another, making Vue components more dynamic. And we'll be seeing more with props later within this crash course. Another component that we're going to be taking a look at is the welcome.vue and welcome-item.vue. Within the welcome.vue, you'll notice that in the welcome item component that is being defined, there are these two template tags within the component's template that have the value of !icon and !heading on the template itself. And these represent what are called name slots. Beneath these name slots, there is actually this additional content which represents the default slot. If we take a look at the welcome item component, we'll see these slot tags that have a name attribute that correlate with the values on the template tag in the welcome.vue component. And beneath these, you'll just see a basic slot tag, which is going to be for the default slot content. So as we just seen, props allow you to pass JavaScript values to components. What slots allow you to do is pass in template content to a child component. And as you're able to see in the welcome.vue, these slots allow us to pass in template content directly to the welcome item component. And we'll be seeing a very basic use case of slots later within this crash course. Now I do want to mention that don't worry if this boilerplate does not make a lot of sense initially. The purpose of going through all this is to introduce you to how Vue works and its features. Beneath the components folder, we have the router folder with the router configuration. If we open up this index.js file, we can see the current routes that we have within the default application. Each route is being defined within this routes array, and each object within this array is a route that links to a component/view. And speaking of views, the next folder we have is for storing all the views of the application. And within this folder, we just have two default views of home and about. So for each page that you want to have in your application, you'll just want to create a Vue single file component here within this folder. Then we have the package.json, which is for all the scripts and dependencies for our Vue project. And lastly, we have the Vite config, and this is where you can set up configuration for Vite within the Vue application. We won't be modifying this file for this crash course, so you can just leave it as it is. Okay, so to get started, what we're going to be doing is some cleanup here within our Vue 3 project. Now, as I mentioned, we're not going to be needing a lot of this boilerplate that we were given when we generated our Vue 3 project. So what we want to do is inside of the assets folder, we're going to remove all these files. So we'll just select all these three here and delete those. We're not going to be needing those. Then inside of the components folder, we're not going to be needing any of these components as well. So we can select all these and we could delete those. And as you can see here, once we do that, we are going to get an error because some of those components were being used in various spots within this project. So we don't need to touch the router. We're going to leave that as is. Now within the views folder, we want to come to the home view, and we deleted this welcome component. So we're going to want to remove it from this view as well. So we'll select it in the template and then also the script. And then inside of the app.vue file, we want to remove the entire header tag here. We're not going to be needing this, but we will keep the router view. We'll remove the hello world import as well as the router link because we're not going to be needing that here inside of this view or component. And then for the styles here, we're just going to remove all these and we'll just create a new style tag. All right. And then the last thing we're going to need to do is inside of our main.js, we no longer have this main.css file, so we can remove this from this file as well. And that should give us a clean template to begin working on our project. Now for this project, we are going to be using a few dependencies. So we will be using a package called UID, and this will be for generating a unique ID for each one of our to-dos. We'll also be using Iconify for Vue for the icons, and then we'll also be using Sass. So here inside of our project, what we want to do is open up the integrated terminal, and then we'll just open up a new terminal tab, and then we want to cd into this Vue to-dos folder. So we'll say cd Vue to-dos. And then once we're inside of this folder, what we want to do is say npm install --save -dev to save these as a dev dependency. And then we just want to list these out. So we'll say UID, and then we'll also say Sass. And I believe Iconify for Vue was just @Iconify/Vue. So we can paste that in here and hit enter. And those should install those here into our project. So once that's all done, if we head into the package.json and we come down to our dev dependencies, we should see Iconify, Sass, and also UID. Okay, so what we're going to do is set up some global/base styles for our project, and where we're going to do this is within the app.vue file. Now, if you had a relatively larger project, then what I'd probably recommend you doing is actually creating a separate style sheet here inside of your assets folder, and then importing that here within your main.js like we've seen within the boilerplate. But since we're creating a relatively small application, we can just store all of our global styles here inside of our app.vue file. So the first thing that I want to do is actually on the style tag, we want to update the language. So we'll add a lang attribute to be SCSS since we're going to be using Sass. And what we're first going to do is we're going to head over to Google Fonts and we're going to import this font family of Rubik. So we're going to be using light, regular, medium, and bold. And we'll be using the import directive to import this font from Google. So we'll copy this import directive and then we'll paste it here inside of this style tag. Now for the remaining styles that we're going to be adding here to our app.vue file, I'm just going to reference the Github repository to save some time, so that way we can focus more on Vue and less on the actual style aspect of it. So on the Github repository here, there'll be a link down below in the description. We just want to switch branches, and this is section 3, so each section within this crash course should correlate with a branch here, and we want to click on section 3. Then we're going to view the code, we'll go to the source directory, and then we want to select the app.vue, and then we'll just copy these two simple styles. So we just have a reset and then a container class. All right, let's begin to create our first Vue component, which is going to be the navigation for our application, which is going to look something like this. Now, I did add this image right here to my project, as you can see right here inside of the assets folder. So to download this, what you want to do is head over to the Github repository, and this is going to be section 4. So we can go to section 4 on the branch list. We want to view the code, go to the source directory, and you should be able to find that here inside of the assets folder. So to create our navigation component, what we want to do is head over to our components folder and we want to create a new file. And I'm going to call this to-do header.vue, but feel free to call this whatever you want. And then I'll hit enter here. And then inside of this component, what we want to do is use our extension of Vue VS Code snippets, and we can type in V and say base. And we want to select the option here of vbase 3 setup. Now, by default, what this is going to do is set up the template, the script, and the style tag with the lang of CSS and this scoped attribute here. And I'll talk more about what the scope attribute does in a little bit. But one thing I do like to do, and this is as a preference, is I like to have my script tag above my template. But the order of this doesn't really matter. It's just more of a preference. But I'm going to be using it in this manner here. We have the script, then the template, and then my style tag. Now, before we begin to build out this component, what I want to do is head over to the app.vue and define this globally, since we want to have our navigation appear on every single page within our application. So what we can do is above the router view, we can say open bracket, and we can do to do, and we can see right here that our extension is actually seeing our component inside of the folder, so we can actually click on this here, and then it's going to automatically import that for us here inside of our script tag. And then all we need to do is add a slash and then a closing bracket. So now if we head back over to our to-do header component, and we, for example, just put a h1 in here, we should be able to see this now within the application. So let's remove this markup that we have within the template and begin to generate the markup we need for our to-do header component. So I'll start off by creating a header tag, and then within here we'll create a nav tag, and we'll add a class on here of container. Now, if you recall, this class comes from the app.vue file and the container class that we imported globally. Okay, so inside of this nav tag, we'll create a div, and we'll give it a class of branding. And within here, we'll just have our image. And what we're going to do is reference this image we have inside of our assets folder. So we can do .. and we can go to our assets. And then we want to use this Vue logo black. Okay. And then beneath this, we'll just have an h1, and this will say Vue to-dos. Now, beneath the branding, we're going to create the actual navigation itself, so that way users can switch between pages within the Vue application. So we'll create a UL, and then this will have a class of nav-routes. And within here, in order for users to be able to switch pages inside of the Vue application, we need to use a component called router link. So we can say router link here, and we can click tab. And usually that's going to automatically import it for us here inside of our script, but for some reason that isn't working. So we can do a close bracket, and now we have our router link. So let's actually import this here inside of the script tag. So we'll say import, and then we'll do our curly brackets, and we'll say router link, and this will be from, and then we want to say the Vue router. All right. Now, we're actually not seeing our content here anymore because we haven't defined a required prop on the router link of to, which informs Vue where this router link should go to. So on the router link, we want to say to, and this one's going to be for the home route to actually navigate us back to the home page of the Vue application. So we'll say home, and then where this to prop should be pointed to for the home route is just simply slash. Okay, and once we save that, it's going to reappear because it's no longer going to have an error. Now, we also want to create another router link for our about page, so we can duplicate that down, and we'll say about, and we want to navigate this to prop to say about. All right. So if we save that and we head over to the application, now if we click on about, it's going to take us to the about page, and if we click on home, it'll take us back to the home page. Now, if you're wondering where I'm getting the values for these to props at, you can actually find that inside of the router. So if we expand the router folder and go to the index.js, you can see that the path here is slash for the home route, and then the path is slash about for the about route. So that's how I'm coming up with these values here for the to prop. Now for the styles, again, I'm going to head over to the Github repository, and we're going to copy and paste in the styles so that way we can focus more on Vue. So within section 4, we want to go back to the source directory. We want to go to our components, and we want to click on to do header.vue, and then we can just copy all the styles here within the style tag. And then if we check the application, we should now have something that looks like this. Now within this to-do header component on the style tag, we have what is called a scope attribute that is being applied. And what a scope attribute does is it's going to scope all the styles that are defined here within this component to only this component. So what that means is if we had an additional header element in another component, we don't have to worry about the styles being applied to that component. They're only going to be applied to this component specifically. Okay, let's work on the ability to create new to-dos within our application. So within the views folder, let's open up the home vue.vue file. And what I want to do is actually rename this from home view to to-dos view. So we can rename this, and then we'll just say to-dos view. And then we want to head over to our router, and then in the index.js file, we want to update all references of home view to to-dos view. Okay, and then that should not cause any issues. We should still be able to go back and forth between our about view and our home view. Now back within the To-Dos view, inside of our main tag, let's start off by creating an H1, and this will say create to-do. Now within this view, we don't have our style tags yet, so let's define those. So we'll say style, and then we'll give it a lang attribute of SCSS, and then we also want to scope this, so we'll say scoped. And let's head over to our GitHub repository, and then we want to change branch to section 5. Then we want to go to our source directory, and then we want to go to the views, and then we want to click on the To-Dos view here. And then we'll just copy these styles, and then we'll paste them inside of this style tag within our component. Now for this input and button, we're going to create a separate component, and then we're going to import that component here into our To-Dos view. So within our components folder, let's create a new file, and we'll call this to-do creator.vue. And then within this component, let's use our vbase command, and we'll select the vbase 3 setup. And then again, what I'm going to do is just I'm going to take the script, and then I'm going to paste that above the template. And then let's head over to our To-Dos view, and let's import this component. So we'll say to-do creator view, and we'll tab in here to automatically import that for us. And then if we switch over to our application and we come over to our to-do creator component, and for example, we just put an H1, say hello to make sure this is working, we should now see that here below our create to-do header. Okay, so let's remove this H1 from our template, and then on this div, we're going to add a class, and we'll say input wrap, and then within this div, we'll create our input, and this will have a type of text. And then beneath our input, we're going to create our button, and the value of this is going to be create. So let's head over to our GitHub repository and grab the styles for this. So we'll go to our source directory, then we want to go to our components, and then to do creator, and then we'll copy these styles right here, and then we'll paste them in this component. And then once we do that, we should have a much better looking input and button within our application. Now that we have our UI created, we want to be able to capture what a user types into this input and then create a new to-do based off that value. So let me show you how we can do this with Vue. So within the script tag, what we're going to want to do is create some data to store the value that the user is going to be typing into this input. So how we create data is very simple. It's just like creating a normal JavaScript variable. So for example, we can say const, and we can call this a to-do, and we can set this equal to an empty string. All right, then we can use something or a special Vue directive called a vmodel to take this value and sync it up to this input. So what we can say is vmodel, and then we'll set it equal to our to-do. Now, just to test this out, let's actually take our to-do and output it to the template, and we can do this using must-hash syntax. We can just say to-do, and now, for example, if we actually put a value in here of testing, we should see that within the template, and we also see that value within our input. So if we type into our input, then what should happen is this testing value should also be updated to whatever value is inside of this input. So if we say testing is updated, as you can see, this is not actually updating. And although we're syncing our data, which is to do, with a vmodel directive on our input, as you can see, this is not working. And the reason why is because this variable we created is actually not reactive. And for this to work, we have to make our variable or data reactive, either using what is called the ref method or the reactive method. So let's make our data reactive, and I'll show you how to do it using both methods. And we'll start out by using what is called the ref method. So what we want to say is ref, and we can hit tab to import this because we need to import this from Vue. And this is a method, and then what we want to do is just pass in our string here of testing, and then now our data has become reactive. So for example, now if we say testing is updated, as you can see, once we type in the input, now this value is also going to be updated because it is now reactive. Now, as I mentioned, there is an additional way to create reactive data using what is called the reactive method. So let me show you how that works. So what we'll do is just create a new variable, and we'll call this to-do state. And then we want to set this equal to the reactive method. And we also want to import this as well. So the first difference between the reactive method and the ref method is the type that the data can be. So for example, with this to-do variable that we created, which is set equal to a ref, the type of this data is actually a string, which is a primitive value type. Well, when we create data using the reactive method, the type cannot be primitive, meaning we just can't take the string here and set this equal to our to-do state. This is not allowed. So to achieve something that like we have here with our to-do variable, we would want to create an object, and then within here we'd have a property called to-do, and then we could set this to the value of testing. And then now what we could do is on our V model, we would say to-do state, and then we would say dot to-do to access that property within this variable. And this will work the same way. So if we actually update this to testing reactive to show you, as you can see now, we have it here. And then again, we would want to output to-do state dot to-do here. And as we type in the input, this is still going to be reactive. So another difference between the reactive method and the ref method is how we access these values inside of our script tag. Now within our template, it's pretty straightforward. If we wanted to access this to-do variable, we can just output to-do here. If we want to access this to-do property within this to-do state object, we say to-do state.to-do. But within our script, it works a little bit differently. So let me show you. So for example, let's just log out of the console. We'll say to-do. And I am using an extension called Console Ninja, which if you are interested in learning more about that extension, I do have a separate video on that you can watch. But the TLDR for this video is that it gives us inline consoles here within VS Code, which is pretty cool. Now what's happening here when we use the ref method is that this method is going to take in our argument, which is the value of testing, and then it's going to return it within a ref object. And as you can see, we have this value property within the object that contains a value of our ref. Now, if we, for example, come down to our to-do state and we log this out, if we just do to-do state, then once we save that, well, we get what we would expect. We have our to-do property and then the value of testing reactive. Now, the biggest difference between these two is how we access values within our script. So if we want to get a hold of the actual value of this to-do, which is a ref, we need to append on here the .value property, and then we'll get the value of our actual data. Whereas with to-do state, we can directly access this with what we would expect by just referencing our object and then the property on that object. Now with the ref method, one thing you may have noticed is that, for example, if we wanted to get the value of our to-do within the script, we have to use the .value property. However, if we wanted to access this value within the template, we do not have to say to-do.value. And the reason for this is Vue is actually unwrapping these refs within the template so that we don't need to use the .value property within the template itself. So that's the basics on the reactive method and the ref method for creating reactive data within Vue. Now, if you do want to learn more about the ref method and the reactive method, I did create a separate video which I'll link down below in the description, which goes over these two methods in more depth. Now for this crash course, we'll be using both the reactive method and the ref method to create reactive data. However, for right now within our application, we're just going to stick with the ref method for this component. So let's remove this to-do state variable. Then we want to remove the reactive import. And then let's also revert back our V model to just hook up to our to-do variable. And we can also remove this paragraph tag as well. Now for this section, what I recommend is you head over to the Chrome store and you install what is called the vue.js DevTools. And this is going to be helpful when it comes to debugging your Vue.js application. And we're going to be using this here within this section. Now that we're able to capture a user's input for their new to-do, we want to be able to actually create our new to-do. And how we're going to do this is we need to send back the input that the user has typed here, which is going to be stored inside of this to-do variable, back to our to-dos view, so that way we can create our new to-do. And to do this, we're going to need to do something called a emit, which what a emit does is it emits something from our component here of to-do creator, and then we can listen for that emit here within our parent component of to-dos view. And once we hear that emit, we can do something, and what we want to do when we hear that is then create our new to-do. So we want to send a emit from our to-do creator component once a user clicks on the create button. And once they do that, we want to then send the value of our to-do over to our to-dos view. So first off, what we want to do is listen for a click on this button. And to do that in Vue, we can simply just do @ and then we have a whole bunch of event listeners here that we can look for or listen for. And the one we want is going to be click. Okay, so I just want to pause the video here really quick to clarify something when it comes to listening to events on the template items as we're doing here now. So the method that I'm showing you is actually the shorthand for something called the v-on directive. And what the v-on directive does is it listens for DOM events and then it's going to run some JavaScript when that event is triggered. So how this would look if we weren't using the shorthand would be v-on::click, and then we would set it equal to the JavaScript that we want to run. But instead we're going to be using the shorthand, which is just using the @ symbol. And for the rest of this application that we're going to be building, we'll be using the @ symbol or the shorthand to listen for events. And then once we click, we want to do something. So we're going to create a function and we'll call this function create to do. All right. And then within our script, let's go ahead and create this function. So we'll create an arrow function. So we'll say const create to do, and we'll set this equal to a new arrow function. Now within this function, what we want to do is emit the current value of our to-do. Now to make an emit from our component, we first need to define it. So to do this, we want to create a new variable and we'll call this emit. And then we're going to set it equal to what is called the define emits macro. And we also need to import this from Vue just as we've done with our ref. Now the define emits macro accepts an array, and then we can define all the emits that we want to create here inside of our component. Now the emit that we're going to create is going to be called create to do because that is what we're going to be doing. We're going to be creating a new to do. Now this define emits macro is going to return a function which we can use here through emit within our create to do function. So we can define emit and then we can pass in as a parameter the custom emit that we just created of create to do. Now each time that we click on this button, what's going to happen is this create to do function is going to run, therefore it's going to emit create to do from this component. And we can see that if we inspect our application and we go to inspect, and then within our actual inspect here, we can go to our Vue dev tools. And then what we want to do is we want to select on this right here, and we want to go to our timeline. And now each time that we click, if we, I believe, just scroll this down a little bit, we can see component events. Now each time that we click on this create button here, as you can see, we have this create to do, which is going to be emitted by our to do creator. Now, if we select this event, we're going to get some more details about the specific event that we're emitting from this component. Let me just scroll this up a little bit. So as you can see, the component that it's coming from is our to-do creator. The event that we're emitting is create to do. And then we have this third option here for params. And as you can see right now, we don't have any params. So what we want to send along with this custom emitted event is going to be the value of our to-do. So within the create to do function where we're emitting our event of create to do, we can also pass an additional parameter and send along the current value of our to do. So we'll do a comma and then we'll say to do, and remember to actually get the value of our to do using a ref, we have to say value. All right. So now if we refresh our application and we say this is a new to do, and we click on create, and if we go down to our custom emitted event, as you can see now, if we scroll down, we have a param, and then you can see the value of our to do, which is this is a new to do. So now that we're able to emit from our component and send along the value of our to-do, back in our to-dos view, we can listen for this custom emitted event. Now, before we do that, we want to create some data to actually store all of our to-dos in. So what we'll do is we'll create a new data variable. So we'll say const, and we'll just call this to-do list, and then we'll set it equal to a new ref. So we can tab there to automatically import that. And the default value for this is just going to be an empty array. Now, what we want to do is we want to listen for this custom emitted event from our to-do creator component. So what we can do is say @ again, and as you can see, because we're using Volar, we have the ability to actually automatically detect this from our component. So we can click create to do. And now whenever we hear this custom emitted event, we want to run a function. And the function that we're going to be creating is going to be called create to do. So within the script, let's go ahead and create this function, and we call this create to do, and then we'll set this equal to a new arrow function. And recall we are passing a param on here of our to do, so we want to look for this param on our function, so we can just say to do here as a param. And then what we want to do is we want to create a new to-do object within our to-do list array. So what we want to do is reference our to-do list, and to get the value of this array, remember we have to use .value, and then to push a new object onto an array, we use the push method, and then we'll pass it a new object. Now for each to-do, we're going to have a few properties. The first one's going to be a unique ID, so we'll give it a property name of ID. And to generate a unique ID, we're going to be using our package that we installed earlier called UID. So we'll need to import that here into our script. So we'll say UID and then from, and this will be from UID. Okay. Now to use this, we just need to declare UID, which is a method, and that'll generate us a unique ID. Next, we'll have our actual to-do value, so we'll just pass a property of to-do, and because the field and the actual param that we pass are both the same, we can just leave this as to-do. Then we're going to have a flag for if the to-do is completed, so we'll say the property name is going to be is completed, and this will have an initial value of null. And lastly, we're going to have a flag or a field to detect if we are currently editing our to-do, so we'll say is editing, and we'll pass this a value of null as well. Now, one mistake that I did make is for our create to do function that we're running here, when we hear our custom emitted event, we don't need to declare these parentheses. We can just declare create to do. Okay, so if we save that, and now within our dev tools, let's actually test this out to make sure everything is working. So what we'll do is we'll switch tabs to go to our components tab. And as you can see here, we have our to-do list array, which currently we don't have any to-dos. So within our input, let's say this is a new to-do, and click on create. And then let's refresh our dev tools. And as you can see here, we now have our to-do inside of our to-do list array. So if we expand this, we have our unique ID, the is completed flag, the is editing flag, and most importantly, our to-do. Now we have a couple issues when it comes to creating our new to-dos. So the first issue we have is, for example, if we don't have any value in our input and we click on create and we refresh our dev tools, we're going to have empty to-dos, which we don't want. Now another small issue that we have is, for example, if we add some value here, so this is a new to-do, and we click on create, so that creates our to-do, but it doesn't actually remove the value from the input. I believe it would be much better that once we create our new to-do, that we remove the value that the user has typed in from the input. Now to make these changes, we are going to need some additional data within our component. We're going to need a data value to track if we have an invalid to do, and we're also going to need a data value for our actual error message that we want to output if a user has an empty to do. So what we could do is actually just create two additional refs, one for if our to-do is invalid, and then one more for the to-do error message if it actually is invalid. This would be completely fine to do, but since we are doing a crash course, I do want to show you an alternative, which is going to be creating all of this data using the reactive method. So how I look at it is that all these refs that we're going to be creating pretty much are going to be centralized around our to-do. We have the to-do value, then we have to know if the to-do is invalid, and then we also have a to-do error message. So that's why I think it makes sense to create a reactive object and pretty much group all these values together. So instead of having a variable called to-do, which is set equal to a ref, what we'll do is we'll update this variable name to to-do state. And then instead of being a ref, we'll change this to reactive, and then we want to import that up here. Now I should also mention that you can have refs that are objects and arrays, as we have seen here within our to-dos view, where we have a to-do list that is a ref, which is an array. Again, we're only really doing this for the sake of a crash course. If you wanted to keep these all as refs, you could, or if you wanted to use reactive, you can do that as well. So what we'll do is we'll have this set to an object, and then we'll have our to-do property, which will be an empty string. Then we're going to set a invalid property, which will be the initial value of null. And then we're going to have another flag of error message, and then that'll be the value of an empty string to start. And I think I spelled this wrong, so we'll use our extension here to fix that as well. And now that we're using the reactive method to declare our data, we need to update some references here to our data within our components. So no longer is it going to be to-do.value, it's going to be to-do state .todo. And remember, since we're using reactive, we don't need to use the .value property on the end to obtain the value of our to-do. So that's one benefit. And then also on this input, instead of being to-do, we just want to say to-do state .todo. Okay, let's begin to implement the validation to our create to-do function when we are creating a new to-do. So the first thing we want to check is we want to ensure that the value of our to-do is not equal to an empty string because we don't want to create empty to-dos. So inside of this if check, what we're going to do is we'll say our to-do state, and then we have our to-do property, and we want to ensure this is not equal to an empty string. So as long as it's not equal to an empty string, then we can create our new to-do. So inside of here, we'll have our emit of our create to-do event. And then what we also want to say is we want to reset our to-do back to an empty string. So we'll do to-do state dot to-do, and we'll set this equal to an empty string. And then we want to return out of this function. Now, if the to-do equals an empty string, then the code inside of this if block is not going to run. Therefore, we're going to have an invalid to-do. So beneath our if block, what we can say is we want to target our to-do state and the invalid property, and we want to set this equal to true. Then we want to update the error message inside of our to-do state as well. So we'll target to-do state and then our error message, and this will read to-do value cannot be empty. Now, each time that we run this function, we also want to ensure that we reset the invalid property back to null. So at the very beginning of this function, before our if check, we can target our to-do state and then the invalid property, and we'll set this back equal to null. Now, if we do have an invalid to-do, we want to let the user know, and we want to show them this error message that we have defined within our application. So in our template beneath the input, we'll create a paragraph tag, and we're going to add a class of error MSG, and then we're going to use must-hash syntax to output our error. So we can say to-do state, and then we'll do error message like this. So now, for example, if we go to create a new to-do and we don't have any value in here and we click on create, as you can see, we're going to get output of the error message, to-do value cannot be empty. Now, if we have a to-do that has value, so for example, this is a new to-do and we click on create, then it's going to create that to-do and it's going to remove the value from our input. And if we refresh our DevTools, we can see that to-do is added to our array. So we created a new to-do and we no longer have an invalid to-do within our application, but we're still seeing our error message being displayed within the application, which we don't want. To fix this, we can actually use some special directives that Vue offers to only show this if we actually have an error within our to-do. And those directives are called vshow and vif, and I'll show you how both of those work. So to do this, I'll just copy down this paragraph tag, and we'll start off with the vif directive. So we define the vif directive by saying v-if and set this equal to, and this accepts a true or false statement. If the value is true, then it'll show this paragraph tag. If it is false, it will not. And what we want to pass it here is our to-do state .invalid property. So if this is true, then we want to show the paragraph tag. If it is not, then we don't want to show it. So we'll say to-do state .invalid, and as soon as we do that, we're going to see one still because we still have this paragraph tag. So if I remove this and save it, as you can see now, we're no longer going to see our invalid message, but if we have a invalid to-do, then that's going to show. So let's take a look at the vshow directive. So let's uncomment this paragraph tag, and then we'll comment out the one with the vif directive. And then on the paragraph tag, we just want to define our vshow directive, so it's v-show, and this also accepts a true or false statement. So again, what we want to say in here is to-do state .invalid, because we only want to show this paragraph tag if we have a actual invalid to do. So if we save that and then we hit create here, as you can see, we are still going to see our message, and if we create a successful one, then that is going to disappear. So as you can see, these directives both do the same exact thing. They're going to hide or show our paragraph tag based on a Boolean condition. So what is the difference between the vshow directive and the vif directive? Well, if we head on over to our inspect tool and we select the elements tab, we can see what the difference is. So let's expand this body tag, and then we want to expand our div with the ID of app and then the main tag. And as you can see here, we have this comment that says vif, and then we have one paragraph tag which has a style set to display none. So what the vif directive does is it doesn't render in the element to the DOM. So as you can see, we don't see the paragraph tag, where the vshow directive is going to render in the element to the DOM, but it's going to set the style and then the display to none. So for example, if we attempt to create a to-do that has no value, then that paragraph tag that had the vif comment is going to be rendered in right here. And then the paragraph tag with the vshow directive is going to have that style, which had a display of none, that's going to be removed from the element. Then if we actually create a new to-do, so we'll just say a new to-do and hit create, then as you can see, that's going to disappear and it's going to be rendered out of the application. And this one's going to have the style set back to display none. So you might be wondering, which directive should I use, the vif directive or the vshow directive? And that's mainly going to depend on what exactly you're doing. So the vif directive is going to have a higher toggle cost because you're actually destroying and recreating the element within the DOM itself. Where the vshow directive, that's always in the DOM, the style of display none is just going to be toggled back and forth. So a general rule of thumb when it comes to these two is if something needs to be toggled quite often, then you want to go with vshow. And since this error message is going to be toggled quite often, I feel the best fit is going to be using the vshow directive for this component. So let's go ahead and remove the paragraph tag with the vif directive. Now, when we have an invalid to-do, I think it would also be a good idea to have some sort of different UI state for our input itself. And we can actually add a dynamic class to this div with a class of input wrap when we have an invalid to-do. And this is called class binding. So on this div with a class of input wrap, what we can do is we can add a dynamic class to be applied when a certain condition is true. So we can say :class instead of this equal to an object. And what we want to do is we only want to apply a certain class when a certain condition is true. So the class we're going to apply is going to be called input ERR, and then we say : and then the condition. Now we only want this class to be applied when our to-do state.invalid property is true. And if we save this, and now as you can see, we currently have a invalid to-do, and as you can see, that class was applied here to the div that also has a class of input wrap. And then if we actually have a valid to-do, that class should be removed from that element. Now for this to actually work, we're also going to need to actually apply this class to our style sheet as well as a class for our error message. And we can actually get those over from the Github repository. So let's switch to section 7. And I believe we should already be in the to-do creator. So what we want to grab is this class of input error, which is just going to change the border color. So we'll just paste this above the focus within. And we'll also want to grab the styles for our error message, so we can copy this and we'll paste it just below the input wrap itself. And now if we head over to the application and we attempt to create a to-do with no value, the input itself is going to turn red, and now we have our styled error message. Now what I want to show you next is probably not necessary for the application that we're currently building. However, since we are doing a crash course, I want to make sure to at least cover it. And what that is slots. And what slots allow you to do is pass template data to your components to make them more dynamic. And a very common way to utilize slots is through a reusable button component. Now for this application, we're not going to be having very many buttons. In fact, the only button that we're truly going to have is within this to-do creator component. So again, this isn't probably very necessary to do, but I want to show you how we could use slots. So what we're going to do is create a new component for our button. So in our components folder, we'll create a new file and we'll call this to-do button.vue, and then let's create our Vue boilerplate. So we'll say vbase and we want the 3-setup, and then let's move our script to be above the template. So what we want to do is head back over to our to-do creator component, and we want to copy the markup for our button, and we want to paste it within our new component, and we'll remove these div tags, and we can also remove this click event here as well. Then we're also going to want to get the styles for this. So in our to-do creator component, we can grab the style, which is going to be right here. So we'll copy the button style, which is very simple, and we'll also paste this within the style tags. And back within the to-do creator component, let's remove the styling for our button. We no longer need this. And then we can also remove the button here as well. So instead of having the button markup directly within the template, we're going to use the component we just created instead. So we'll say to-do button. And for some reason, this isn't auto imported again. So we'll just save that. And then we want to import it up here within our script. So we'll say import, we'll do to do button, and then we'll say from, and then we want our to do button. And once we save that, we should again see our button. And what we also want to do is add our click handler on this as well. So we'll say at click, and then we'll set this equal to our create to do function. Now, the problem that we have with our to-do button component we created is that if we wanted to reuse this component for other buttons within our application, well, the value is always going to be create. So instead of having the value of create within our button, we can actually replace this with a slot tag. And the slot tag also accepts a name attribute if you have more than one slot within your component. That way you can name them. So for example, we can call this button if we wanted to, but since we're only going to be having one slot, we don't need to add this name attribute. So what a slot tag does is allow us to render in our own template content. So for example, if we head over to our to-do creator component and we remove the self-closing to-do button tag and we add a closing to-do button component tag, and now within here, we can define any template content that we want to be defined within our button for the slot tag. So anything that we define within our to-do button component is going to be rendered in for the slot tag. So now if we say this is a new value, then once we save that, this is going to be rendered in for the button content. So what the slot does is it makes our component more dynamic, allowing us to put any type of content we want within our to-do button. So what we can also do if we don't want to necessarily define a slot, we can also have fallback content within our slot. So back on our to-do button, instead of leaving the slot tag empty, we can put the value we want it to have by default. So that way, if we don't define anything within our component, the fallback content will be displayed. And for the sake of our application, since we're only going to have one button, we don't need to define a closing to-do button tag. We can just have a self-closing tag, and then our slot fallback content will be displayed. Now that we have the ability to create new to-dos, we want to be able to display those within the application. And to do this, what we're going to do is create a reusable component that we're going to use for each to-do item that we have within our list. So within our components folder, let's create a new component, and we'll call this to-do item.vue. And within here, we'll use our command of vbase, and we want to select 3 setup, and then let's just move the script tag above the template. Now back within the to-dos view, what we want to do is we want to look at our array of to-do list, and for each to-do that we have within this array, we want to create a to-do item component. And to handle this, we can actually use a special directive from Vue called the v4 directive. Now what this directive does is it's going to loop through the array that we have of all of our to-dos, and for each to-do that we have within this array, we can request that it output our to-do item component. So within our template, below our to-do creator, we're going to store all of our to-do items inside of an unordered list. Now within this unordered list, we can define our to-do item component, and we can tab to automatically import that in, and then give it a self-closing tag. And once we save that, we should now see our to-do item component being displayed within the application. Now on this to-do item component, we want to add that v4 directive because we want to output a to-do item component for each to-do item that we have within our to-do list data. So what we'll say is v4, and what this does is it accepts a param that you want to use to reference each to-do that we have within our array. So the param that we'll call this is to-do, and then you say in, and then you want to iterate over the actual array, and our array in this case is going to be our to-do list. So as soon as we save this, we're no longer going to see our to-do item component in the application because we don't have any to-dos within our to-do list array. So let's create a few different to-dos. So we'll say this is a new to-do, and I'll copy this, and we'll just do like number 1, and we'll hit create. And as soon as we create one, we're going to see our to-do item component now in the application. And if we create another one and say number 2, for example, now we're going to see 2 to-do item components within the application. So now that we're able to create a to-do item component for each to-do that we have within our to-do list array, what we want to be able to do is have our to-do item component accept this param of to-do, which contains all this information on each to-do. It's going to contain the ID, the to-do, and these 2 flags of is completed and is editing. And to do this, we want to be able to have this component accept a prop with our to-do param. So to define a prop on our component, we want to say colon, and then we want to give the prop a name. And in our case, we're going to call this prop to-do. And then we want to set it equal to the value that we want to set this prop to. So in our case, the value is going to be our param of to-do. And now that we have this prop defined, we want to head over to the to-do item component and we want to define this prop within our component. So within this script, let's declare a new variable and we'll call this props. And we'll set this equal to what is called the define props macro. Now this macro either accepts an array or can accept an object. And the recommended way to declare props within Vue is by using an object. But I will show you how to do both and I'll explain why it's better to use the object over the array. So for the array, we just want to pass an empty array. And within here as a string, we want to define our prop. So we would just say to do because that is the value that we defined within our to-dos view. Now, the issue with defining your props as an array is it doesn't give you much information on the specific prop that is being defined within this component. Now, yes, we do know that for this prop, it's going to be an object, but if other developers or if you come back in a few weeks and you're taking a look at your component, you might not really remember what exactly this prop is or what it's doing. So that's why it's recommended that you use the object syntax instead of the array syntax. And once we define our props as an object, you'll see that it's much more easier to read and understand what exactly that prop is doing. So let's remove this array and let's define a new object. And within this object, we can define our props as a property. So for example, we have our to-do prop. So we can just say to-do, which is a property, which will be set equal to an object. And within this object, we can define different properties for this prop. So the first property we're going to define is going to be the type, and this is going to inform us of what type this prop is. And the type of our to-do prop is going to be an object. So if we pass anything except an object, then Vue is going to yell at us because we have defined this prop to be a type of an object. We can also define a required property here to inform that when we define our to-do item component in our application, that we want this prop to be required on that component. So we do in fact want this, so we're going to set this to true. And lastly, you're also able to set a default value for the prop itself. And how you do this is you just want to define a default property, and then you set the value to whatever you want the default value for the prop to be. Now, this works only if your type of prop is a string, number, or Boolean. This isn't going to work if you have a type of object or a type of array. So for example, if your type is a string, you can just set a default value of maybe hello, or maybe if it's a number, you can just say 9. Now, if the prop has a type of object or type of array, then the default value must be returned within a factory function. So we can say default, open up our curly brackets, and then return either our object or array. Now, we're not going to be needing a default value here for our prop within this application, but I did want to show you how we can do that. So for now, we're just going to be having a type property and also a required property within our prop. Now, as you can see, when you define props using the object syntax, it's going to provide you a much better understanding of what exactly that prop is and what it's doing. So say, for example, if we're a new developer coming into this application, we can see that this to-do prop should be an object and it should always be required within the component. And not only does this give you a better understanding, it also offers prop validation for the application. So let me show you what I mean. So let's open up our DevTools and then open up the console. Then if we navigate back over to our to-dos view, so currently we have our to-do prop, which is being set equal to the to-do param. Now, if we change this to maybe something like a string with a value of hello and we save this, and then we come back over to our application and we try to create a new to-do, and we go to create, we're going to get this warning because the prop expected a object, but it got a string with the value of hello. And the same thing will happen if we don't define a prop at all. So for example, if we remove the entire prop of to-do and we save this, then as you can see, it's going to get another warning that it's saying missing required prop of to-do. So now that we have the to-do prop defined within our component, let's begin to work on the markup. So what we'll do is we'll remove this div and we'll create an li tag. And within this li tag, we're going to have an input and the type is going to be a checkbox. And this is going to be for toggling the to-do from completed to not completed. Now, when using an input with a type of checkbox, we have the ability to use an attribute called checked. And what checked does is allows us to control whether or not this checkbox is checked or not. And what we want to do is we want to sync that attribute to a value we have on our prop of is completed. So to do this, we'll say colon, and then we want to do checked. And we want to set this equal to our to-do prop, and then we have that property of is completed. And let's spell that right. And let's save this. And what we can also do to see the changes we make within our component is let's actually create a new to-do. So we'll say this is a new to-do. And once we create this, we should now see our checkbox. Now beneath the checkbox, we're going to create a new div, which is going to have the class of to-do. And within this div, we're going to first create a new input that's going to have the type of text. And what this is going to be for is when we edit or update our to-do, we want to be able to type into this input to update the value of that specific to-do. Now beneath this, we're going to have a span tag. And what we want to do within here is actually output the value of our to-do. So to do this, we're going to use must-test syntax. And then we'll say to-do.to-do, and then we should see that within the application here. So earlier on within this crash course, you learned that we can sync up a data value from our script to an input within the template using what is called the v model directive. Now we don't want to do that within this component because what that's going to do is it's going to update the prop or the value of that prop directly within this component, which is something you're not supposed to do within Vue. When it comes to updating the value of a prop, you should always handle that within your parent component in which that data exists, which is going to be within our to-dos view. So what we can do is instead of using a v model, we can use a value attribute and we could sync that value attribute up to the current value of our to-do. So we can say colon value, and then we can set this equal to our to-do.to-do, and then we should see that value now within the input. And we'll be covering how to update a value of a prop within an upcoming section in this crash course. Okay, now below our div with the class of to-do, we're going to create an additional div, and this is going to have the class of to-do actions. And what we're going to store inside of here is going to be all the icons for each one of our to-dos. So where we're going to get these icons from is going to be the package we installed earlier called Iconify. So what I've done is I've searched up the icon that I'm looking for, which is called check circle. And then I narrowed down the search results by the author, which we're going to be using one called phosphor. And if we scroll down, you can see we have 6 different icons we can use that are in relation to our search. So the one we're going to be using is this first one, which has a name of ph:check circle. So what's really cool about this library is we're able to customize the icon directly on the website itself. So for example, the color that we want for this icon is going to be this green, so we can do that. And then the size we want is going to be 22 pixels. So as you can see, we can customize the icon directly here within the website. And we can also do some other things like flip it horizontally or vertically, rotate it, and also do a mode of block or inline, which we're going to leave all of this as it is. And then if we scroll down, it tells us how we can actually use this icon inside of our component or Vue file. So the first thing we want to do is actually import this into our component. So in our script above our props, let's import this. And just underneath where it tells us how to import it, it shows us how we can actually use this icon component within our template or Vue file. So what I'm going to do is copy this snippet of code right here. And then within our to-do actions, we just want to paste this into the div. So now if we save this and we head over to our app, we should now see this icon. So why I really like Iconify is there's access to a ton of different icons from a bunch of different authors. So if you're looking for different designs or different themes, you're probably more than likely going to be able to find that by using Iconify and all the different authors they have for the icons. And it's also really easy to customize. As you can see, if we want to change the color of the icon, we can add a color attribute. If we wanted to adjust the width and the height of the icon, we can add a width attribute or a height attribute. Now, in addition to our check circle icon, we're also going to be having 2 other icons we're going to be using for this component. So what I'm going to do is just copy down this icon component twice. And then to update the icon, all we have to do is update the icon attribute. So we're going to be using the same author for all these icons. So all we want to do is update the name. And the second one we're going to have is going to be a edit pencil. So the name of this is pencil-fill. And we're going to leave the color the same color of green and the width to be 22. And the final icon we're going to be using is going to be a trash icon. So the name is going to be trash. And then we'll update the color. So the color is going to be F95E5E, which should be a nice red. So if we save that, we should now have our 3 icons we're going to be using for this component. So also what we're going to want to do to our icon is add a class to each one of these. So we'll do a class, and on each one we're going to add the class of icon because we are going to target these within our styles. Now for the style of this component, we're going to head over to the Github Repository and we're going to copy and paste these styles in. So this is section 9, so we'll want to switch to the section 9 branch. Then we'll go back to our components folder and we're going to select the to-do item, and then we'll want to copy all these styles here within the style tag. And if we save that and head back over to the application, we should have a much nicer looking to-do. Now, one thing we're also going to need to do is add some styles to the whole entire list itself, which is back in our to-dos view. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a class to our UL, which is going to be called to-do-list. And for the styles, let's head back over to the Github repository, and we're going to go back to our source directory, and then the views folder, and then our to-dos view. And then what I'll do is we're going to have 2 classes we're going to be adding, one for the to-do list and one for the to-dos message, which we're going to be adding here in just a moment. So I'll copy these 2, and then I'll paste those just below the H1. And now if we check the application, that should look a lot better. There's now a space between our to-do and then the actual to-do creator component. Now for this crash course, as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to focus more on Vue and less on the actual styling of the application itself. Now, the styling of the application is fairly simple and straightforward. However, I do want to mention a few things about this component that we just created. So what you may notice is when we hover over the actual to-do component, then the icons are appearing. So how that's happening is initially on the to-do actions, we have the opacity set to 0. And when we hover over the li item, we're targeting the li in a hover state, and then we're setting the opacity of the to-do actions to 1. And the other part I want to quickly mention is this custom checkbox that we have. So when we click on it, it turns green, and when we toggle it off, it goes back to this white. So how we're creating this custom checkbox is with this CSS right here. So we're targeting the input with a type of checkbox, and then we're setting the default appearance to none, and then we have the CSS properties here to style that up, and then we're targeting the input in a check state, and then we're just setting the background color to what we have here, which is this green color. Now for this to-do item component, we don't want to show every single element that we have within this component initially. For example, with our input with the ability to edit the to-do, we only want to show this if the to-do is being edited. Same thing goes for this check icon. We only want to show this if the to-do is being edited. So what we can do is within our template, we can use what is called the vif directive to only show these elements if certain conditions are true. Now, if you recall, we have 2 directives to do this. We have the vif directive and the vshow directive. Why I'm going to opt to use the vif directive is because this application could have a bunch of to-dos, and we might not necessarily actually need each one of these inputs for each of the to-dos. So why would we want to render in that input if we're only going to need it for a few different items? So that's my reasoning for using the vif directive for this component instead of the vshow. Now you could do that, but in my opinion, it's probably best to go with the vif directive. And I'll also show you a really cool feature to using the vif directive that you don't have while using the vshow directive. So on our input, let's add the vif directive, and we want to set this equal to the to-do prop, and then we have a property on here of is editing. So initially this is not going to be true, so we're not going to see the input. Now, one cool benefit to using the vif directive is we can also chain along right below the actual element that we're using the vif directive on and use something called the velse. So what this does is it's going to say if this is true, then show this input, otherwise show our span tag. And you can also use another directive or another chain to this and say velse if, and set this equal to another condition if you wanted to. So it would check this one first, and then if that wasn't true, then it would do another check to say, hey, is this true? Then maybe show this. Otherwise, as a last resort, then you can use your velse. But since we only have one condition for this input and span, we can just say vif or velse. Now we're going to do the same exact thing with our icon. So we only want to show this first icon, which is our check circle, if the to-do is currently in an edit mode. Otherwise, you want to show this pencil fill icon. So what we can do is just copy this vif directive and we can paste it on this first icon. And then we can copy this v-else and we can paste it on the second one. So again, what's happening is we only want to show this first icon if the to-do is currently being edited. Otherwise, you want to show this pencil icon. And if we hover over the to-do now, we should only see these two icons. Now, currently, if we don't have any to-dos within the application, we aren't informing the user that we don't have any. So what we're going to do is beneath the to-do creator component, we're just going to output a message if we don't have any to-dos within our application. So beneath our UL, let's create a new paragraph tag, and we're going to give this a class of todos.msg, which this is a class we actually just copied into our style sheet. So within this paragraph tag, the first thing we're going to output is actually an icon from Iconify. And that icon is going to be this sad but relieved face. So what we'll do is first off, since we haven't actually used Iconify in this file, we need to import it. So we're going to copy the import, and that'll just go right beneath our UID import. And then we can use this component in the template. So let's copy this snippet of code here, and then we'll paste it within our paragraph tag. And we actually don't need this color attribute, so we'll remove that as well. And beneath the icon, we're just going to output some copy, and that copy is going to say you have no to-dos to complete, add one. So if we save that, and now we head back over to our application, we should see that message being displayed. Now we only want to see this message if we don't have any to-dos within our application. So how we're going to handle this is by using the vif directive. So we'll say vif, and then what we're going to do is we're going to look at the length of this array. So if there's entries in the array, meaning it's greater than 0, then we'll show this UL. So what we'll do is we'll say to-do list, and then we'll get the length property, and then we'll say if this is greater than 0, show the UL. Otherwise, we'll use our velse directive, and then we'll just show the paragraph tag. So if we have to-dos within the application, then we'll show them. If not, then we'll show this message. So let's try it out. So if we say this is a new to-do, the message should disappear, and we should see our to-do. And then if we refresh the application where we're not going to have any to-dos, we should see the message. Now with each to-do that we have within the application, we're going to want to be able to interact with it and do a few things. The first thing that we're going to focus on is the ability to actually complete each to-do. Now when we complete a to-do from a UI perspective, we're obviously going to have this checkbox turn green, but we're also going to add a strike through on the text as well. And from a Vue perspective within the application, what we want to do is we have this property of is completed that we're going to want to update to either true or false, depending on the status of the to-do, if it's completed or not. Now recall that if we want to update this is completed property on our to-do, we can't do it within this to-do item component because you're not supposed to update the value of a prop directly in the child component. You're supposed to handle that within the parent in which that data exists, which would be our to-dos view. So what we'll need to do is within the to-do item component, we're going to listen for a change on this checkbox of either it's selected or deselected. And each time that we either select it or deselect it, we're going to emit a custom event from this component, and we're going to listen for that event within our to-dos view. And when we hear that event on this component, what we're going to do is create a function that is going to update this property that we have on each to-do of is completed. Now to implement this functionality, the first thing that I'm going to do is on our v-for loop, we can actually pass a second parameter. And that parameter is going to be the index, and the index is going to give us the position of each to-do that we have within our list. So for example, this current to-do is the 0 position inside of our array. So this index value for that specific to-do is going to be 0. And you'll see why this is going to be important here in just a moment. So what I'm going to also do is we're going to need to pass this index param as a prop within our to-do item component. So what we'll say is :index, and we'll set this equal to the index. And within the to-do item component, let's define this prop. So right beneath our to-do prop, we'll create a new prop of index, and the type is going to be a number, and we'll also want this to be required as well. So we'll set this to true. Okay, now on our input with the type of checkbox, we want to listen for this input to be updated or for it to change. And to do this, we can use an event listener called input. So let's define that. So we'll say @ and then we'll say input, and then we'll set this equal to, and then what we want to do each time this input changes is we want to emit a custom event from this component. So we can actually do a inline emit without actually creating a function, because we really don't need to create a separate function to do an emit. It makes sense to do it directly here within the template. So to define a inline emit, they call it, we can do the money sign, and then you do emit, and then you define the emit name. Now remember, we're still going to need to define this emit within our script, but what we can say is this is going to be toggle complete. And what we want to do is we can also pass along a param here with this emit, and we want to pass along the index. And the reason why we're going to pass along the index is to get a reference to which to do that we want to update this is completed property on. And let's save this, and that should make it a little bit easier to read. Now we also need to define this emit within our component. So beneath our props, let's use the define emits macro. So we'll say define emits, and then within our array, we'll define this emit that we're creating, which is going to be toggle completes. And now back within the to-dos view, let's listen for this event. So we'll come all the way to the end here. Once we save it, it should format a little bit better. We'll say at, and then we'll do toggle and complete. And then what we want to run here is a function we're going to create called toggle to do complete. All right, so we save that. It's going to be a little bit easier to read. And let's define this function. So beneath our create to do function, let's actually create our new function, and we'll call this toggle to do complete. And then we'll set this equal to a new arrow function. And for the param on this function, remember we're passing along the index, which is going to give us a reference to the position in which this to-do exists within our to-do list array. So we'll call this param to-do POS. And within this function, what we want to do is target that specific to-do that we're going to update this is completed property on. So what we'll say is to-do list, and then we'll say .value, and then using our param of to-do POS, we can target that specific to-do by using brackets and saying to-do POS, and then the property that we want to update is going to be is completed. And what we're going to do is set it equal to the opposite of whatever that value is at. So we'll say equal to, and then we'll use an exclamation point, and then we can just copy this exact line right here, and then we can paste it right beside the exclamation point. So every time this function runs, it's going to update this is completed property to the opposite of whatever it is. And now within the application, we should be able to toggle our to-do from completed to not completed. And we can see this if we open up our dev tools and we go to the Vue dev tools, and then we can inspect our to-dos view, and we should be able to see our to-do list array. And now if we select on the checkbox and if we refresh the state, we should see that the is completed property is now set to true. And if we unselect it and refresh the data, you can see it's now set to false. Now, when a to-do gets completed, in addition to having a green checkbox, we're also going to add some strike through to the text itself. And how we'll do this is by using a class bind on the span tag that contains our to-do. So what we'll say is colon, and we'll do class, and we'll set this equal to a new object. And the class that we want to apply is going to be called completed-to-do. And we want to say colon again, and we only want to add this class when our to-do has a is completed property of true. So we'll say to-do, which is our prop, and then we'll say the is completed property. And then within the style sheet, what we want to do is within this to-do, right above the input, we can just paste in this style that I have for our completed to-do class. And what it's going to do is set the text decoration to have a line through. And as you can see now, when our to-do is completed, we have this line through it. And if we uncheck it, then that is going to disappear. Okay, so the next thing we're going to work on with this to-do item component is the ability to edit our to-do. So what we want to have happen is when we select on the pencil icon, we want to be able to display the input and then update the to-do. And to handle this, what we're going to do is on our pencil icon, we want to listen for a click. And once we hear that click, we want to emit an event from this component. And what we want to actually update is going to be this property of is editing, and we want to set that to true. So on the pencil icon, what we want to do is we want to listen for a click. So we'll say at, and then we'll do click. And what we want to do is a inline emit. So we can do this by saying money sign, and we'll do emit. And the custom event we're going to emit is going to be called edit-to-do. And we also want to send along the current index to reference that within our to-dos view to get reference to the specific to-do that we want to update. And to use this custom emitted event within our component, we want to define this within our define emits macro. So we can copy this, and then within our define emits macro, we can just add a comma, and then we can define our new emit of edit to do. Then within the to-dos view, we can listen for this custom emitted event. So on our to-do item component, let's listen for this by saying @ and then the event was called edit-to-do. And then we want to run a function we're going to create called toggle edit to do. And we can copy this function name and we can define it within this script. So we'll say const, and then that'll be toggle edit to do. And then we'll set this equal to a new arrow function. And we also want to make sure this function accepts the param for the current index. So we'll call this to do POS. Now within this function, we want to do the same exact thing that we have done within our toggle to do complete. So what we can do to save some time is just copy this line and we can paste it within our function of toggle edit to do. But what we want to do is change the property from is complete. We want to change this to is editing, and then we can just copy this and we can paste it on the other side as well. So let's test this out. Now in the application, let's just define a new to do, and then we'll select create. And now what should happen when we select on the pencil icon, this property of is editing should be toggled to true and therefore show the input to edit our to-do. So if we click on the pencil icon, as you can see now the input is displayed and we can update our to-do. Now the one issue we have is if we attempt to select on the check icon to save our changes and revert out of the is editing mode, well, this doesn't work. So what we want to do is we need to head over to the to-do item component. And as you can see, we have the click handler on this pencil icon, but we don't have a click handler on the check circle icon. So what we want to do is copy this click handler with our inline emit, and we want to paste it on this icon as well. All right, so if we save that, and now we head back over to the application and we select on the check, then that is going to revert it out of the is editing mode. So if we attempt to edit this to do by selecting on the pencil icon and we type in a new value, which is type in update, and we want to save the change, as you can see once we save it, our new value is not actually being saved. Now to handle this, what we want to do is we want to listen for this input to have a change using the input event listener. And each time that we hear this change, we want to emit a new custom event with the current value that's in our to-do. And then what we're going to do is back in our to-dos view, we're going to listen for that event to be emitted from this component. And then we're going to take the new value that the user has typed into the input, and then we're going to update our actual to-do. So back within the to-do item component, what we want to do is we want to listen for the input event on this input. So let's define that. So we can say @ and then we'll do input. And then what we want to do is another inline emit. So we'll say money sign and then we'll do emit. And the event that we're going to emit, or the name of it, is going to be called update-to-do. And then let's save this to reformat it really quick, and we have an error. So, these need to be single quotes. So let's just copy both of these and change those to single quotes. Now, along with just emitting update to do, we also want to send along a few parameters. So the first parameter we want to send along is going to be the current value of this actual input. Okay, so how we can get that is by saying money sign event, and we can grab the target and then grab the value of this input. So that's going to give us the current value for whatever the user has typed in when they're actually in the input typing. Okay. And then also we want to send along the index to get a reference to the current to-do that we're going to be updating. And again, we're going to need to define the submit within our define emits macro. So let's come over to our define emits macro in the script, and let's define this custom emitted event. And now back within the to-dos view, let's listen for this custom emitted event. So right beneath our edit to do, we'll say @update-to do. And then we're going to run a function we're going to create called update to do. So let's copy this and let's define this within our script. So we'll create a new arrow function and we'll call this update to do. And then we'll set this equal to a new arrow function. Now within this arrow function, we want to accept our parameters. So we have the to do value, and then we also have the to do position. So we'll say to do val and then to do POS. And within this function, what we want to do is target that to do. So we can say to do list dot value, and then we can use brackets and then our param of to do POS to reference that specific to do. And then we want to access the to-do property, and we want to set this equal to our param of to-do val. And now we should be able to update our to-do. So let's give this a try. And inside of the application, it looks like our to-do got wiped. So we'll create a new one and we'll hit create. And now if we edit our to-do and we update the value, so we'll just say update and we select on the check icon, now you can see the updated to-do is going to display within the application. Okay, now the final thing that we want to implement to our to-do item component is the ability to delete this to-do. And to handle this within our to-do item component, again, we're going to want to emit a custom event. So let's scroll down to our icon, and what we want to do is you want to listen for a click on this icon, and then we want to run an inline emit again. And the event that we're going to emit is going to be called delete-to-do. Now, instead of passing along the index as a parameter, we're going to take our prop of to-do and we want to pass the property of ID instead. Then to use this custom event within our component, we just want to define this within our define emits macro. So within our array, let's just create a comma and then define the delete to-do event. And now within our to-dos view, let's listen for this custom event. So on our to-do item component, we'll say at, and then this is going to be delete to-do. And then we want to run a function we're going to create called delete to-do. All right, so let's copy this and let's define this function within our script. So we'll say const delete to-do, and then we'll set this equal to a new arrow function. Now for the param, we're going to call this to-do ID because that is what we're passing. And to remove the to-do from the application, we're going to use what is called the filter method. So what we'll do is we're going to reference our array to-do list, and then we want to set the value. And we're going to set this equal to the to-do list.value, and then we can run a method called filter. Now what the filter method is going to do is it's going to loop through our array, and what we can do is pass it a callback function, and we'll just pass it an arrow function. And then what we want to do is pass it a param that's going to reference each item within our to-do list array. So we can give this a param of to-do. So within this arrow function, what we want to do is reference our param of to-do that we're passing inside of this callback. And then on this param, we have access to the ID of that to-do. And then we want to say not equal to, and then we want to reference our param that we're passing from our custom emitted event of to-do ID. And now we should be able to delete our to-do from the application. So let's give this a try and let's create a few to-dos. So we'll say this is a new to-do number 1, and we'll copy this and we'll hit create, and we'll create another one, say 2, and then we'll do one more and we'll say 3. And now if we attempt to delete number 2, we should be able to do that. And as you can see now, we have to-do number 1 and to-do number 3 left within the application. Now currently within the application, as you can see, we have a couple to-dos, but if I attempt to refresh the application, then those to-dos are going to be removed from the application. Now to avoid losing the to-dos when we refresh the application, there are a few things that we can do. So we could save our to-dos to a database, and each time that we refresh or come back to the application, then we can reach out to the database and populate the application. Another simpler option that we have is we can utilize what is called local storage, which is what we're going to do for this application. So we can save all of our to-dos to local storage, and each time that we refresh the application, we can reach out to local storage and populate the application with those saved to-dos. Now to handle this, we're going to create a reusable function which is going to save our to-do list array to local storage. Then we'll execute that function each time that we create a to-do or have an update to our to-do. So beneath the to-do list array, let's create a new function, and we'll call this set to-do list local storage, and we'll set this equal to a new arrow function. Now within this function, we're going to reference local storage, and we have access to a method called setItem, which is how you set an item to local storage. And this accepts two parameters. You're going to have a key, and then you're going to have a value. So for the key, we're going to pass it a string, and this is basically going to be the name of the item you're setting to local storage. So we'll pass it a value of to-do list. Now for the value of this item inside of local storage, it must be a string. So what we want to do is we need to stringify our to-do list. So to do this, we can say JSON, and then we have access to a method called stringify, and then we want to pass it our to-do list array. So we'll say to-do list.value. And now each time that we call this function, we're going to set an item in local storage that has a key or name of to-do list, and the value of this item in local storage is going to be the current value of our to-do list array. Now, in addition to having a function that's going to set an item to local storage, we're also going to need a function to retrieve our items from local storage when we refresh the application. So beneath our to-do list array, let's create a new function, and we'll call this fetch to-do list, and then we'll set this equal to a new arrow function. And within this function, what we want to do is get a reference to the item inside a local storage of to-do list. So we'll create a new variable and we'll call this saved to-do list, and then we'll set this equal to. Now, when we retrieve an item from local storage, we need to parse it. So what we'll say is JSON.parse, and then inside of this method, we can pass in the local storage, and then we have a method called getItem, and this accepts a param of the key that we set, which is going to be to-do list. So within here, we can pass it a string and say to-do list like this. Now, this variable that we created is going to have a reference to all the to-dos that we have saved within local storage. But for example, maybe this is a brand new application and we haven't used it, then we might not have any items inside of local storage. So for that reason, what we want to do is an if check, and we want to check if this variable is not equal to null, because if this value inside of local storage does not exist, then this variable is going to be null. So if this value of save to-do list is truthy and has value, then what we want to do is we want to reference our to-do list array, and we'll say .value, and then we'll set equal to our save to-do list. Now we want this function of fetch to-do list to run each time that this page is loaded in. And to do that, we can just simply execute the function within the script tag, because each time that this page is loaded in, all the code within this script tag is going to be executed. So we can just say fetch to-do list like this, and now each time the page is loaded in, this is going to run, and it's going to check to see if we have any to-dos stored inside of local storage, and if we do, then it's going to set those equal to our to-do list array, and those should be displayed within the application. Now, the last thing that we need to do is each time that we create a new to-do or make an update to one of our to-dos, we want to run this function of set to-do list local storage to set the most updated version of our to-do list array to local storage. So what we want to do is take our function and we want to run it within each one of these functions. So we can set it in our create to-do, and then we also want to do it in these 4 functions in which we're doing updates. And with that set, we should now be able to create to-dos and update our to-dos and have them saved to local storage. So let's give this a try. So let's create a new to-do, and then we'll hit create. And now if we refresh the application, we should still see the to-do. Once we load back in, it's going to reach out to local storage, and then it's going to populate the application with our saved to-do. And we should also be able to make updates to this as well. So we can just edit this and just say update it and save it, and then refresh it, and there you go. We are now able to save our to-dos to local storage so that we don't lose them when we refresh the application. Now currently we're executing this function we created called set to-do list local storage each time that we create a new to-do or when we have an update to one of our to-dos. And there isn't anything wrong with how we have this implemented. However, I do want to show you an alternative way that we can handle something like this using a function available to us within Vue called watch. And what the watch function does is it listens for a change on our reactive data, and once it hears that change, it's going to invoke a callback function in which we can execute some JavaScript. And in this case, what we want to do is whenever this to-do list array updates, we want to then run our function we created called set to-do list local storage. Now to use the watch function, we're first going to need to import it from Vue. So where we're importing this ref, we can just do a comma and say watch. All right. Now where we're going to actually implement this is just going to be right beneath our to-do list array. So we'll say watch, and this accepts a few parameters. The first parameter is going to be the reactive data that we want to watch, which in our case is going to be this to-do list array. So let's define the to-do list array. Now the second parameter that this function takes in is going to be the callback. So for this, we're just going to pass an arrow function. And within this function, we can execute any JavaScript that we want each time that this to-do list array gets updated. Now within this callback, you can also pass in a few parameters, and those parameters are going to be for the new value of the to-do list array and the old value. So for example, you could say new value, and then you can do old value like this, and then you could reference that within the JavaScript here. However, we're not going to be needing this, but I just thought I would mention that you are able to do this within this callback. Now, the third parameter that this function accepts is going to be an object for different options that you can configure for this watch function. And we're not going to be covering all the options that we can add to this watch function, but one that we are going to add is going to be called a deep property. And what this does is it's going to allow us to track changes deep within this to-do list array. Since this array is going to contain objects, if you don't pass this value of true, then what's going to happen is it's going to be unable to detect when certain properties within objects within this array are updating. So for that to happen, we need to pass this deep property within the options and set that to true. And to test this out within the callback function, what we can do for now is we can just do a simple console.log and we can just say hello. All right. Now what I want to show you is if we come over to our application and now we start to make changes, as you can see, this is going to run because the to-do within this array is being updated. So for example, if we click on the edit button, as you can see, that's going to run. If we make a change to our to-do, that is going to run. Now let's clear the console with Console Ninja. So I'm just going to clear the output. And if we change this deep property to false, I want to show you what happens. All right, so if we save that and we do a refresh, so obviously initially it's going to run, but now when we make changes to the actual to-do, as you can see, this is not going to fire because what's happening is it's not looking deep into this array within those objects to track if those certain properties within those objects are changing. So this is why we need to have this deep property set to true. Now, instead of logging out to the console hello each time our to-do list array gets updated, we instead want to run this function of set to-do list local storage. So let's remove this console.log and instead run this function. And where we invoke this function within our other functions such as create to do and within our updates, we want to remove this as well. And with that all updated, let's test this out within the application. So let's edit this to do, and we'll change the value to number 3, and we can save that. And then let's also just toggle this to be completed. Now with these updates that we made to the to-do, this watcher should have ran, therefore invoking this function of set to-do list local storage, updating our to-do within local storage. So now if we refresh the application, it's still going to pull in this updated to-do. And now we have an alternative way to update our to-dos within local storage using the watch function. Now the final piece of functionality we're going to implement for this application is when we complete all of our to-dos, we want to display a message informing the user that they have completed all these. And to do this, we're going to use something within Vue called a computed property. Now what the computed property does is it takes in what is called a getter function, and it's going to return a read-only ref object for the return value of that getter function. Now to use a computed property, we first need to import it within this file, very similar to how we've done our ref and the watch function. So we'll do a comma and we'll say computed. And then what we're going to do is beneath the watch function we have, we're going to create a new variable and we're going to call this to do completed. And we'll set this variable equal to the computed function that we just imported. So we'll say computed, and within this function, this accepts a callback. So we're going to define a new arrow function. And within this callback, which is considered the getter function, we want to return a value, which is going to turn this variable that we created of to do completed into a computed ref. And within this getter function, what we want to say is going to be return. And what we want to return is our to-do list array. And we want to loop over every single to-do within this array. And we want to check to see if the property we have of is completed is true for all of our to-dos. So to do this, we're going to use a method called every. So we'll reference our to-do list array, and then we're going to get the value of this, and then we can execute a method called every. Now this method takes in a callback, so we'll pass it an arrow function. And this callback is going to accept a parameter, which is going to reference every single to-do that we have within this to-do list array. So for the param, we're going to define this as to-do. And what we want to do within this callback is we want to check that the to-do is completed. So we're going to reference our to-do param, and then we want to grab the property of is completed. Now, what this every method does, if you're unaware, is it's going to loop through our entire array and it's going to check each one of our to-dos. And what it's going to check for is if this property that is completed is true. And if all of our to-dos within the array are completed, then the return value from the every method is going to be true. Now, for example, maybe we have 3 to-dos and only 2 of them are completed. Well, then not all of them are going to be true. So therefore, the return value from the every method is going to be false. Now, the reason why we're using a computed property over a traditional ref or something like this is because what's special about the computed property is it automatically tracks the reactive dependencies. So what that means is each time that our to-do list array gets updated, then this computed property is going to reevaluate, which is something that wouldn't happen if we were just using a normal ref. So within the application, what I've done is I've created a few new to-dos, and we're going to test this out to make sure everything is working. So what we'll do is we'll go to our inspect, and then we'll open up the Vue DevTools. And within here, as you can see, we have this to-do completed, which is set to false right now, which is considered a computed value. So if we just minimize this a little bit, and now if we go to toggle these, as you can see, once we toggle all of them and we refresh the DevTools, then that value is now going to be true. If we unselect one and then we refresh the DevTools, as you can see now, that's going to be false because not all of our to-dos are actually completed. So now they're able to track when all of our to-dos are completed, we're going to output a message within the application when all of our to-dos are completed. Now beneath this paragraph element, we're going to create another one, so we'll say P, and we only want to show this paragraph if our to-dos are completed and if we actually have to-dos within the array. So we're going to use a vif directive for this, and what we're going to do is within this directive, we're going to say to-do completed, and we also want to check that the to-do list array, we're going to check the length on this, and we want to make sure that this is greater than 0. And on this paragraph element, we're also going to be adding a class of to-dos message. So we'll say class, and then we'll say to-dos dash message. And within this paragraph element, we just want to output the message. So what I'm going to do is copy and paste this in. So we're going to have an icon, which is going to be this party popper from the Nodo-v1 author. And the message is going to say you have completed all of your to-dos. So within the application, as you can see, we have not completed all of our to-dos, but as soon as we complete this last one, we should now see our completed message. And if we uncomplete any of them, that message is going to disappear. Alright, so that's going to wrap it up for the building of this application. Now, one thing I did add, which is kind of irrelevant for the actual sake of this crash course, is some content on this about page, which just gives you some general information about what this application does and why it was created. And if you want to add this to your application, you can find that within the Github repository. Now for this Vue application that we built, one thing that wasn't required was the need for an additional page or route. So what I want to show you is how we can create one. Now in this application, we currently have 2 routes. We have the home route, which is our default route, which is where the actual to-do application lives. And then we have this additional route that was created called about. Now for each route, we have 3 required properties. We have the path, then we have the name, and then we have something called the component property, which is going to tie this path to a certain component. So as you can see for this home route, it's going to tie into our to-dos view. Now the one difference between the home route and our about route is how the component is being defined for that specific route. So on this home route here, what's happening is the component is actually being imported at the very top of our index.js file, and then it's being referenced for this component property. Now on the about path, what's happening is this component property is accepting a function which is importing this component. And this is referred to as lazy loading the route. And I'm not going to get too in depth with what this actually does, but essentially it's going to generate this component into a separate JavaScript chunk. Therefore, it's going to improve the performance of the Vue application. Now, if you don't want to lazy load in your routes for whatever reason, although I should mention that it is best practice to do so, you can import your component the same way as we have within this default route. So you can import the component at the very top and then declare it like you're seeing here within this component property. And you might be wondering, well, why don't we lazy load in this home route component? And the reason why we don't need to do this is because this is the default route, and therefore this route is going to be loaded initially by default. So we don't need to lazy load this route in. Okay, now that we know the basics about a route, let's create one. So for this, what we want to do is we're going to create a new view. And since we're not really going to be utilizing this view, I'm just going to be calling this testing view.view. All right, and then within here we can just say vbase, and we'll select the 3 setup, and we can just save that. And then back within our router file, what we want to do is create a new object. So for this, we're going to define a path property, and the path, we can call this whatever we want. We'll just say /testing, and then for the name, we'll define this, and we'll call this testing. And then for the component property, we're going to use lazy loading. So what we can do is just copy this component with the function, and we can paste it in here. And instead of referencing the about view, what we can do is we can say /, and then we want to say testing vue.vue, and that is all you need to do for creating a new route. So within the testing view file that we created, what we can do inside of our div is just put an h1 and say testing. And now within our Vue application, if we go to this route of /testing, we should now see that page being loaded in. All right, now that we have our application completed, I'm going to show you how we can deploy this application to Netlify. So for this, what you're going to want to ensure is that you have an account with Netlify. And if you don't have one, you can sign up for free. So to sign up, you want to click on this button here in the navigation. And the easiest way to sign up, in my opinion, is by using GitHub. Now, once you have your account created, you should be taken to a dashboard that looks like this. And how we're going to be deploying this application to Netlify is we have a button here that says add new site. And if we click on it, we have a few options. And what we want to select is going to be import an existing project. And to me, this is the easiest way to deploy your application to Netlify. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new repository on GitHub, and we're going to push all of our code to that repository. And then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to connect your account here to GitHub, so that way we have access to all the GitHub repositories. And if you don't want to use GitHub, you don't have to. As you can see, you have a few other options to choose from, but for the sake of this crash course, I'm going to be using GitHub. So what you're going to want to do is connect to the Git provider. So you're going to select this button, and what it's going to do is it's going to authorize your GitHub account, so that way you can see all the repositories that you have. Now for this, we're going to need a new repository over on GitHub, so let's create that. So over on GitHub, let's create a new repository, and we're going to give this a name, so we'll call this vue-todos, and we'll say crash course, but feel free to name this whatever you want. And then we'll just choose to make this private. And then we can leave all these other options blank, and then we can just select create repository. So once you have created that, you should see the screen here, which is going to inform you how to create a new repository on the command line. So back within VS Code, let's open up the integrated terminal. And then within this terminal window, what we first want to do is ensure that we're CD'd into this Vue Todos folder. So we'll say CD, and we'll do vue-todos. Now, the first thing that we want to do is initialize a new Git repository. And to do this, we want to use the command git, and we say init. So what that did was initialize an empty Git repository. So what we want to do next is then we want to run the command git, and we say add, and we want to add all the files. And to do that, we say period, and then we can do enter. Now for the rest of this process, we're just going to be referencing GitHub. So what we want to do next is what is called a git commit. So we're just going to copy this line, and then we'll paste it in here. And what that did is commit all the changes that we just added, which essentially is this entire repository since it's a new repo. Next, we're going to want to run this command of git remote, which what this is going to do is connect this GitHub repository to the repository that we have within VS Code. So let's copy this, and then we'll paste it within our terminal. And with all that completed, we can run the final command of git push to push all these changes up to this GitHub repository. And now back here on GitHub, as you can see, once we push all those changes up, we're going to have all of our files here inside of this GitHub repository. So back here on Netlify, now that we have our GitHub repository created and all of the source code pushed up, we can search for this repository. So in the search bar, we can say vue todos and hit enter. And once that searches, we can select on the repository that we just created. Now, Netlify is pretty intelligent, so we actually don't have to do any configuration. We can leave everything how it is by default and click on Deploy Site. Now, the deployment process will take a few minutes, but as you can see now, our changes have been published. So if we select on this URL here, we can see our Deploy To Do application. Alright, that's going to wrap it up for this Vue crash course. Hopefully you found this helpful and feel like you're in a good position to start building your own Vue applications. Now that you completed this crash course, you might be asking yourself what's next. I'd recommend to start simple. What I mean is get a few wins under your belt. So instead of rushing into building another application or a project, continue to explore and expand on what we built in this crash course. You could do a number of things with this application, such as the ability to drag and reorder to-dos, animate the creation and deletion of to-dos, or you could even go as far as having the ability to create different lists for different days, so that way users can see to-dos from previous days. The point I'm trying to make is there's a lot of things you can do to add on to this application to continue learning Vue and improve your skills. If you do end up taking this application a step further, be sure to let me know by joining my Discord server, where you can share your progress with myself and other Vue developers. Thank you for watching this crash course. If you did enjoy it, be sure to leave a like on it down below and subscribe if you are new here to the channel. I'll see you in the next one. Take care.